Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year-ahead horoscope forecast for Gemini and Gemini rising for the entire year of 2023. All right, so I'm live streaming these horoscopes this year, and I'm going through each of the rising signs, and my horoscopes are primarily meant to be watched relative to your rising sign or your ascendant, although you can also watch the one that relates to your sun sign, especially if you're born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you're born at night. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And if anybody has any questions, let me know in the live chat and I'll answer some towards the end of the stream. All right, so here's the planetary movements calendar, which shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. And these are some of the major transits that I want to talk about and some of the dates associated with them here on the screen for those watching the video version of this horoscope. So let's look at how those relate specifically to your chart and your life based on what houses the planets will be transiting through during the course of 2023. All right, so the first transit that I want to talk about is the Mars retrograde that's actually happening in Gemini in your first house of mind, body, self, and appearance. And this Mars retrograde transit is one that really dominated the second half of 2022 once Mars moved into Gemini way back in August of 2022, but it really intensified around late October when Mars stationed retrograde in your first house. So Mars first house transits can be kind of tricky because the first house represents both the body and the mind, and Mars represents traditionally significations like anger, conflict, strife, even war, since Mars was traditionally the planet of war. So since this is all coming into your first house, it can sometimes indicate a period in which you can be more irritable, in which you can be more prone to starting arguments with people or becoming more aggressive or argumentative for a period of time. One of the dangers of this transits is sometimes acting impulsively, which can lead to getting into accidents or injuries or other things like that, since the first house represents the body and physical vitality, and Mars can sometimes indicate injuries or different things like that. So I know I had one Gemini friend, for example, who right around the time of Mars stationing retrograde, they got in a car accident and they totaled their car, which is a very Mars in the first house type of transit. Or another friend who, just had a bit of an injury from doing something impulsively at that time. So one of the things you might want to continue to do, since this transit really is going to continue into the early part of 2023 when Mars stations direct in Gemini around January 12th, and then Mars is not going to depart from your first house and from your rising sign until March, until late March. So the transit doesn't really end until that time period. So one of the things you want to do is just try to be a little bit more cautious. Try not to do anything impulsive that would put you in a dangerous situation. And if this is a transit that's agitating you more mentally, then just try to exercise greater restraint, or sometimes remember that you might be in a period where you're more irritable or likely to start arguments at this time. So see if you can hold back a little bit. On the positive side, this transit can sometimes give people, especially with night charts, a lot more energy and a lot more ability to get work done and to be assertive and to put themselves forward and put their own needs forward in their life in different ways. So that can actually be quite constructive, especially if you're a person that's not usually used to putting yourself first, or you're not usually used to acting in a way that's more assertive or more dominant in different ways. This can be a good time to sort of channel some of that Mars energy, as long as you're not overdoing it. So that's one of the transits right at the very beginning of the year. Moving on to the other transit, another one that begins around March is the planet Saturn is actually going to move and end a 3-year-long transit through the sign of Aquarius, which is your 9th house of religion and education and travel. And Saturn's going to move into Pisces, which is your 10th house of career, reputation, social standing, and overall life direction. So this is going to begin a 3-year transit that's going to last all the way until 2026. So it's kind of a long transit. So Saturn transits can sometimes be a period of consolidation when it comes to the area of your chart that it's transiting through. For you, because it's your 10th house, it's primarily going to relate to your career and to your overall life direction. So you may go through a period in which you encounter a little bit more resistance than usual when it comes to some of the things that you're trying to do in terms of your career and overall life direction. And one of the things that you're going to have to decide is if some of the challenges that arise at this time, if they're meant to be the classic what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type things, so that you're meant to hit those surmountable difficulties and overcome them, and as a result of that you come out of it stronger and with a greater sense of purpose and meaning in terms of your overall life direction and where you're headed with life. Or alternatively, there may be some scenarios where you just run into a blockage or a wall that says that you can't proceed further in this direction with your career or your life direction, and instead you may have to choose a different route or go in a different direction entirely. So for many of us, that can sometimes be very frustrating to run into like a stop sign like that, where Saturn forces you to go in a different direction. But it's one of those things where whenever Saturn closes one door, it always ends up opening another. And that may be frustrating at first, but later, sometimes years later, you look back and realized if you hadn't run into that roadblock, then you wouldn't have gone this other direction, which ended up being very fruitful and very much tied in with or closer to like your overall meaning and life purpose than the other direction was up till that point. So that transit's going to begin as soon as Saturn ingresses into Pisces in March. And then it will be good to start getting a sense for paying attention to if you have any career things that start coming up at that point, because even if they look like small little developments at that time in the second quarter of 2023, they may turn into much larger things later on over the course of the next 3 years as Saturn transits through that sign. All right. Other things happening. So Saturn's departing from your 9th house of religion and philosophy and foreign travel and education. Pluto, interestingly, is actually going to ingress into that same sign, into your 9th house of religion and philosophy and belief. And it's going to do so for just a few months, from March 23rd until June 11th. So this is important because this is going to be a preview of a much longer term 20-year transit of Pluto going through this sector of your chart as it moves through Aquarius between now and the early 2040s, basically. So for many of you, the 9th house represents a person's beliefs, which can indicate like philosophical beliefs, it can indicate religious beliefs, and it can also indicate things like political beliefs. So for a lot of people, Pluto transits represent a major transformation. So many of you may see yourself going through some sort of fundamental transformation when it comes to the concept of belief and the role that it plays in your life during the course of this transit. So since this is going to be a very long-term 20-year transit, this is probably not going to be something that happens overnight. But for many of you, as soon as Pluto starts hitting personal planets, especially to the degree during the course of this transit, you may see specific turning points where you go through a transformation where maybe you go into the transit sort of believing one thing or having one set of beliefs, but you come out of it on the other side having come to a place that's much different and much more foreign to what you're used to up to that point. So that doesn't necessarily have to be either a negative thing or a positive thing. Usually Pluto transits just represent a major change that's sort of fundamental in terms of your overall life and direction, and that can oftentimes be just as positive as it is negative. All right, so that's going to be just a little preview of that transit before Pluto retrogrades back out into Capricorn for most of the year, but I just wanted to mention it because, again, you want to pay attention if any 9th house topics come up in your life at that point, because they could end up becoming much more important in the long term, since that's just a very, very bare like preview of what will be a 20-year long transit. All right, so moving on, let's see, what do we got next? Moving into more positive stuff, Jupiter is going to be transiting through the sign of Aries for the first 5 months of the year, which is your 11th house of friends and groups and social movements. This is also a sector of your chart where we're going to start seeing some eclipses taking place this year, starting in the spring, especially around April and May. We're going to get a solar eclipse in the sign of Aries, which is also your 11th house of friends and groups and social movements. So what that probably means is two things. One, that you're going to begin a period of major beginnings and major endings when it comes to friends and groups and social movements in your life during the course of this year, especially in the spring. And two, that some of these developments are actually going to be positive and are going to be opening up a period of growth and expansion in that area of your life, as opposed to a period of contraction. So sometimes when eclipses take place, they can indicate endings, which can sometimes mean, when it's happening in the 11th house, that you have a period where some friendships kind of go through their natural life cycle and reach an ending point where for some reason certain friendships will end. But for you, I think it's going to err much more on the positive side of probably beginning some new major friendships and starting some contacts or making some contacts with people socially that are going to expand your horizons and ultimately be somewhat positive when it comes to helping to support your overall sort of life direction and career plans, since the 11th house sometimes supports the 10th house as the place of hopes and wishes. So that's going to be especially the case for those of you with day charts, because then that Jupiter transit is going to be much more positive through your 11th house of friends and groups, and it should bring some positive Jupiterian type characters into your life, either that have Jupiter very prominently placed in their chart or that have Jupiter ruling their chart, for example, by having Sagittarius rising or Pisces rising or something like that. So major beginnings and major endings and growth and expansion when it comes to friends is the highlight of that transit for the first 5 months, and that's going to take place all the way until mid-May. Then after that, Jupiter is going to ingress into Taurus for the second half of the year, and this is also a sector of your chart where you're going to start having some eclipses. So you've been having eclipses in the Taurus and Scorpio axis through most of 2022 already. So for many people, when they have eclipses taking place in the 6th and 12th house axis, the 6th and 12th house primarily relate to your physical health and your mental health. So sometimes this can be a period where you're putting greater emphasis or paying more attention to your physical or mental health than compared to other times in your life. Let me just circle that. All right. There we go. So putting more emphasis on mental and physical health are major hallmarks of a 6th and 12th house transit. So sometimes people like go to a gym and like start working on their physical health, or they start trying to eat better. But basically, either there's an event that comes up that kind of forces them to do better in terms of their health, or sometimes they just start feeling like they want to focus on health more so that they can prevent potential issues that might come up in the future. Either scenario is fine. Sometimes it's best to do things proactively like that by doing it ahead of time rather than waiting for something to come up to kind of like force the issue. But either way, this is going to be probably a continuation of some themes from last year where, because we've already had eclipses in your 6th and 12th house, it shouldn't be new or it shouldn't be a surprise necessarily, but it should be something you already know about and that you know you already have to deal with. The positive thing that's going to be different this year is that once Jupiter goes into Taurus, it's going to stay there for the entire 6 months of the second half of the year, and Jupiter should help you to bring some optimism and bring some success to that area of your life, so that if you were struggling with some either physical or mental health issues in 2022, Jupiter ingressing into your 12th house should bring a period where you're able to be more successful in either finding help with that from an outside source and getting sort of like consultations with that, or sometimes when you have positive transits like Jupiter transits in the 12th house, it can be more of a time of looking inwards and finding more success through periods of solitude and contemplation and research and sort of like internal soul searching. Jupiter transits in the 12th can be very helpful and very useful for that, especially if it's not something that you're used to. It can kind of broaden your horizons at this time. And since Jupiter is going to get pretty close to a conjunction by degree with Uranus, this may bring up some unexpected breakthroughs in terms of that, and in terms of reflecting on and dealing with things from the past that perhaps you haven't dealt with up to this point, since the 12th house is very backwards looking sometimes and very reflective or internal. All right, so those are your Jupiter transits for the year in terms of growth and expansion. Another major benefic transit that's taking place this year is we're going to have a Venus retrograde that's going to take place over the summer. So this is a Venus retrograde in the sign of Leo, and it's going to start on June 5th, as soon as Venus moves into the sign of Leo, because this is essentially going to be a very long-term, few-month Venus transit through the third house in your chart, which is the house that has to do with siblings, if you have any, sometimes other extended family or relatives. It can also pertain to friends, short distance travel, education, school, and especially communication as a major theme. Oh yeah, the third house is also neighbors, which is a major theme that sometimes comes up. So this transit is going to start, as I said, in June. It's going to intensify, or it's going to get much more intense on July 22nd when Venus stations retrograde. Then it's going to be intense for that entire period until it stations direct on September 3rd. And then eventually the entire transit will end on October 8th when Venus finally departs from the sign of Leo and completes its entire movement through that sign. So Venus retrogrades can oftentimes have this sense of reflecting on things, on reflecting on old relationships. Venus retrogrades can also bring back people from our past. So for example, if Venus is going retrograde in your third house, if there's relationships from the past that were severed or became frayed or distant, it may cause you to go back and relook at some of those relationships and decide if you'd like to reconnect with those people and maybe smooth over some of the rough edges. So in the third house, this can be people like your siblings, if you've had difficulties with siblings in the past, or there's something that you need to work through. It can also be other types of extended relatives like aunts, uncles, cousins, even in some instances, grandparents. Finally, other relationships that are third house can be neighbors. So there can be, even though that seems like kind of like a mundane or random signification, the third house really does commonly come up when it has to do with people that live in your immediate vicinity, since the third house is the house that comes right before the fourth house. So it's sort of just outside of the fourth house, which is your home and living situation, and what is just outside of your home and living situation, which is just the people that live around you in your immediate vicinity. So sometimes having a period of making new friends or new neighbors in your neighborhood, or reconnecting with old ones that were important to you in the past. Venus retrogrades can sometimes connect things in 8-year increments, because Venus went retrograde in the same sign of Leo exactly 8 years ago in the summer of 2015. So it may be that there's some sort of connection between events that happen in this summer with events that happened 8 years ago, or in other instances, even 8 years before that, or 8 years before that, because Venus will just keep going retrograde in the same spot in the zodiac, in the same sector of your chart, the third house, every 8 years. Other possibilities when it comes to the third house, and it comes to this transit for you, is communication, like rethinking communication, improving communication, and finding a way to communicate more effectively and in a way that conveys your ideas in a way that's more aesthetically appealing or more just positive overall. So if you've been wanting to work on your communication or improve it in some significant way, if you've been wanting to write or sort of write a book or anything like that that would involve communication, those Venus stations could be very important turning points where you kind of find your voice, or somehow reach a new level of communication where you've pushed forward through something that's held you back in the past. So all those can be very good. The last thing is just that the third house represents short distance travel. So for some of you, this could be some sort of improvement in terms of your ability to get around. That could be like getting a new car or having some sort of improved transit system that just helps you to get around your local area more easily. So keep an eye out for that as a little, again, sort of mundane signification, but sometimes those little things can be really positive defining notes during the course of a given year. All right, let me see what else I meant to mention. Other than that, the only thing else I wanted to mention was just the eclipses. We've talked about the 11th house eclipse and the 6th and 12th house eclipses. The only other eclipse we haven't talked about then for Gemini rising is the Libra eclipse that's going to take place in October, because that's going to be in your 5th house, and the 5th house is the house of children, games, fun, and leisurely activities. Put that over there. All right, so solar eclipse in Libra in your 5th house. This is tied in with the eclipses that are happening in your 11th house, which is like growing your social sphere, probably making some new friendships. And 5th house eclipses can be about learning how to have fun and learning how to just go out and have a good time, and the important role that fun and games play in your life as a recharging factor that can help you to enjoy life and live it to the fullest. So in this time period with eclipses starting to take place in your 5th house, you may find that you start developing new hobbies or new side activities. So you could explore different types of games or different types of things that you could do as leisurely activities in order to have fun and in order to import an element of fun into your life that maybe hadn't existed up to this point, or at least to do it in a different way. Maybe there's a group that you can join that has a similar activity that you enjoy, and that becomes eventually some major part of your life. So there's some people eventually, when they start having eclipses in these houses, they find out that they're actually good at a certain hobby, and it starts playing a more important or a more dominant role in their life, such as, for example, famous chess players who start playing chess and then eventually become world champions, or famous golf players, for example, that start having eclipses taking place in their 5th house, indicating a major beginning in that area of their life, and they start playing golf, and then eventually they become a world champion at playing what is otherwise a game or like a leisurely activity for most people, but for them it starts playing a much more dominant role in their life because it becomes part of their life work. So pay attention to that. The 5th house is also the place of children, so this can indicate major beginnings and major endings in your life when it comes to the topic of children. So for some people this could indicate like having a child, because having an eclipse there and a great beginning when it comes to children obviously can be the start of the process of having children or having a child that becomes significant in your life. In other instances, it's just the broader topic of children that become important in a person's life. Like, for example, I've seen people with heavy 5th house placements that had that became like a famous children's book author just because they had so many 5th house placements. So it may be something about the broader theme of children in your life that becomes important. In other instances, for those that already have children, it may just become going into a new stage or opening up a new chapter in your life with respect to your relationship with your children, where there's some sort of turning point or some sort of defining event that takes place for them that's very crucial. So sometimes, for example, when eclipses indicate endings in that area, it could be like a child graduating from high school and going off to college and moving away from home or something like that, which represents in some ways like an ending of that chapter of your relationship with them after 18 years or what have you. So just keep in mind those keywords of great beginnings and great endings when it comes to that topic, and that should shed a lot of light on some of that that's coming up towards the later part of next year, And we'll see a continuation of that actually into 2024, because that's just the very beginning of that story, because that eclipse series is actually going to take place or is going to continue in the signs of Libra and Aries going into the following year. All right, so just looking at my notes, I think those are all of the major things that I wanted to cover for this horoscope for 2023 for Gemini rising. So it looks like it should be a pretty good year. You should be pretty excited. There's a lot of other transits going on, like Mercury retrogrades and different things like that will be relevant to some of you in different ways. We're going to cover some of that in the year ahead horoscope forecast that we're going to record next week on December 16th. So you can join us for that if you want to join the live recording through our page on patreon.com for the Astrology podcast. But other than that, I think that's it for this horoscope. So I'm going to play the credits, and then I'm going to answer a few questions from the live stream. Thanks everyone who joined me in the live chat today. I appreciate you watching, and I'll answer a few questions for a few minutes before I move on and record the next horoscope. So thanks and good luck next year. Special thanks to all the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Mimi Stargazer, and Jean-Marie Kaplan. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then please consider becoming a patron through our page on patreon.com. In exchange, you can get access to bonus content that's only available to patrons of the podcast, such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the monthly forecast episodes, our monthly auspicious elections podcast, or another exclusive podcast series called the Casual Astrology Podcast, or you can even get your name listed in the credits at the end of each episode. For more information, visit patreon.com/astrologypodcast. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, we have a list of recommended astrologers at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrologers on the list are friends of the podcast that have been featured in different episodes over the years, and they have different specialties such as natal astrology, electional astrology, synastry, rectification, or horary astrology. You can get a 10% discount when you book a consultation with one of the astrologers on our list by using the promo code AstrologyPodcast. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called Astro Gold for Mac OS, which is from the creators of SolarFire for PC, and it includes both modern and traditional techniques. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount. If you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I'd recommend checking out my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, where I go over the history, philosophy, and techniques of ancient astrology, taking people from beginner up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. You can get a print copy of the book through Amazon or other online retailers, or there's an ebook version available through Google Books. I also recently published a new translation of the anthology of the 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, which is one of the most important sources for understanding the practice of ancient astrology. You can find that by searching for Vedius Valens, the anthology, on Amazon or other online book retailers. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology, where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, as well as guided readings of ancient texts, and by the time you finish the course, you will have a strong foundation in how to read birth charts, as well as make predictions. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. I also recently launched a new course there called the Birth Time Rectification course, where I teach students how to figure out your birth time using astrology when the birth time is either unknown or uncertain. You can find out more information about that at theastrologyschool.com. Each year, the podcast releases a set of astrology calendar posters for the coming year, and we've just released our 2023 planetary alignments and planetary movements posters, which are now available on our website at theastrologypodcast.com/store. There you can also pick up our 2023 electional astrology report, where Lisa Scheim and I went through the next 12 months and we picked out the single most auspicious date for each month using the principles of electional astrology. You can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2023 report. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine, which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com. Finally, thanks also to the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening May 25th through the 29th, 2023, just outside of Seattle. This year's conference is going to be a hybrid conference where you can either attend online or in person. Find out more information at norwac.net.